The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an asymmetric horror experience where 4 kidnapped victims test their wits against 3 bloodthirsty killers in a game of hide and— oh, you aren't hiding? Just like the reference film, the game is centered around the abduction and torment of our survivors, and I use that term extremely loosely, because if you manage to survive a family of very intellectual cannibals while simultaneously coping with the crippling depression imposed on you by NPC teammates, you're more like a hero. I also coincidentally spent most of my time begging God to spare me from the wrath of a cross-dressing chainsaw-wielding cannibal, so let's start with what I'm horrible at. Playing this game has given me newfound respect for scam artists, pop stars, and delusional online influencers everywhere. What I'm trying to say is, playing the victim is hard. Like, really hard. Our main cast of distressed damsels consists of 5 perfectly aged adults. Perfectly aged in the sense that they are young enough to be in this completely avoidable situation in the first place, but not young enough that this game is flooded with Genshin Impact players. I would explain how and why these goofballs are exactly here, but it's probably scarier if you just assume this is what happens when guys pull over to ask for directions. Each victim has their own strengths and special ability that defines their playstyle. Julie is a master of stealth and can run for as long as the match goes on. There's Anna, whose ability makes her the main character for a while. Connie is really good at dying first. Leland can transform into a middle linebacker, and no one plays Sonny, for obvious reasons. Waking up in a basement would be cool under normal circumstances, but unfortunately, you woke up in Texas. The only goal you have as a Texas refugee is to escape before falling victim to one of the numerous natural disasters that the land has to offer. To escape, you must be alive. Ideally, but more importantly, willing to sacrifice anything to survive the cruel onslaught of your canonically inbred pursuers. But we'll talk more about them later. What's important now is that you know how to get out of possibly the worst decision since the entrusting of Spider-Man to a cast of racists. Freedom can be obtained by fixing fuse boxes, rigging pressure valves, and unlocking final gates. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. The most important rule of being a victim is you are always wrong. Remember that. During the course of the match, you must search for tools to help you flee the premises. My favorite being the Make-A-Wish bones, because using one on killer players ensures terminal cancer. Bone fragments can also be used to help combat the howling corpse that the killers call father, which is more than what us victims have, as we're all clearly fatherless bastards. When Grandpa screams, he reveals the outline of moving victims for all to see, so it's probably better to have him make his wish early or avoid moving while he tweaks out, unless you didn't plan on being at his 125th birthday party, which wouldn't be very inbred son of you. The skill tree is where you go to download a virus, which sounds bad, but this gives your PC and victim perks, allowing you to traverse the map easier. Each victim starts off with the same 3 base perks that are convenient for learning where objectives are, what doors have already been opened by teammates, and most of all, where the basement exits are so you don't suffer like the rest of the Connies I've seen. Once you level up from successfully diagnosing patients and leaving before they ask for a second opinion, you'll earn skill points to use in the skill tree of your victim of choice that permits you access to attribute coins to spend on that character's stats. I recommend not spending them on Connie. Sounds simple, right? Right. The most important rule of being a victim is you are always right. Got that? Good. Let's move on. Now that we've talked about what it takes to escape Texas, let's talk about the mentally ill residents trapped there as part of a human Federico ritual sponsored and endorsed by the government. The Slaughter family is a household of cannibalistic killers driven by their desire for human meat, and each other, but let's stay focused. Of the 5 playable family members, 3 of them are from the reference films, while the other 2 are more like step-siblings. Hey, game is game. Like their traumatized house guests, each family member has their own strengths and power for hunting down victims, unless you're Johnny, whose tracking power just makes the game really confusing. The hitchhiker can place traps that render victims immobile until they're removed. Sissy deploys slowing poison clouds while being able to lace important items and hiding to give victims heart attacks. Gordon can padlock doors and locate victims with his sensibility from kitchen nightmares. And then there's Leatherface, whose entire personality is based on the Sigma male methodology for unmaking things, which explains his chainsaw since he doesn't do much explaining at all. In addition to each special power, all members of the family have a shared focus mode that that allows them to locate objectives victims must tamper with to escape. Being a member of the family also means you have submitted to the rules of its flawed social hierarchy, which also determines where your match starts. As a step-sibling, you are a social outcast, doomed to a life of hard labor. Besides casual murder, your job is to secure the property, collect blood from locations around the map, and feed the corpse father. The same goes for the hitchhiker, who isn't a step-sibling but should probably step into moving traffic. Along with their abilities, Hitchhiker and Bigfoot can use crawl spaces and wall gaps victims often rely on for escape, creating a game loop that I really enjoy. The Cook's game starts closer to Grandpa than the rest of the family, giving him time to collect blood as well as lock significant doors with his padlock ability. Now, you're probably asking, Clutch, which doors are significant? And that's a good question. Feeding Grandpa is like a metaphor for capitalism. The more money you provide, the more likely the government is to cover for your questionable business practices, meaning Grandpa will howl more often depending on his blood consumption level, later spotting victims regardless of their activity. Leatherface is the only family member who lives in the basement due to his line of work. In case it wasn't obvious, Leatherface is a Reddit mod, meaning he doesn't interact with people too often, so first impressions are important. And while proximity is usually power, this mysterious E-boy suffers from whitening disease, otherwise known as the thickness, meaning he is incapable of chasing victims through crawl spaces and wall gaps. Naturally, this led him to want to destroy the beauty industry's misogynistic standards like the independent woman he was always meant to be. Simply beautiful. In addition to an inspiring coming-of-age tale, the family story is also one of growth, each member being able to benefit from miscellaneous perks gained from the skill tree, just like your favorite rapper.
Where's my perk?
However, on the family side of things, perks are more suited for pursuing victims and feeding what probably classifies as an SCP. Stop, we don't do that here. Currently, there are 3 maps in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with each one sparking controversial debates held by self-proclaimed internet professionals on the subject of balance. Seriously, if you mention gas station to any killer player, they will probably send you a picture of your house. Despite the ongoing war for gas station nerds, each map shares the same methods of escape for the most part, and are equally confusing to the mentally ill. This is exacerbated by the fact that the game is extremely dark at times. I mean, there's even a darker version of each map, and victims rely on shadows and tall grass to maneuver most times, because if you're ever seen, escape can be a tad difficult to say the least if you're not insta-locking Julie, which is super cringe, might I add. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is by no means a perfect game. Interactions between victims and killers can feel extremely one-sided, both parties' performances are heavily skewed by communication, and the player base is interesting, to put things lightly. However, in the midst of all the confusion and admittedly wonky gameplay interactions, the game still manages to create exciting moments where the tension for both victims and family members is palpable, so maybe even Redditors can enjoy something for once. And if you happen to not be a Reddit mod for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre subreddit, I suggest liking the video and subscribing so this video hopefully reaches them. I'd like as many of them to know I hate them as possible. And until we all inescapably meet in Texas, laters.